Hey everybody, Casey here with Life Abstract Gaming, and we've just come off the biggest video game showcase in North America, E3. So let's talk about it. The Electronic Entertainment Exposition, or E3 as it's better known, is a week-long conference where the gaming industry gathers to show off what they have coming in the future. It's often where the biggest games and hardware get announced or shown to the world for the first time, and it generates tons of excitement for the companies and their shareholders. But that's only if they do it right. E3, like most things in the gaming community, has become sort of a competition between the major publishers and especially the major console manufacturers, where the proclaimed winner gets the public's mindshare. So like last year, instead of just recapping the announcements, I want to share what I think each company's goal should have been for their presentations and then evaluate how well they managed to achieve them, if at all. First up was Electronic Arts. As one of the least popular major publishers, EA's public image has been under constant attack and they consistently fail to do anything about it. That might have something to do with their bottom line rarely being affected since players still buy all their games. However, this past year, they kind of set off a landmine that could not be ignored. Star Wars Battlefront 2 implemented such consumer-unfriendly microtransactions that the internet backlash prompted intervention from international gambling authorities as well as Disney executives. I go into far more detail about that situation in a previous video I've done, but this year it was imperative that EA put a conference on that directly addressed repairing that damage, as well as ensuring that things like that aren't going to happen again with new titles, specifically Anthem. While the greater majority of EA's conference was relatively boring, I feel like their long apology concerning the Battlefront stuff and reassurances about the changes they were making to it are what fans of that game wanted to hear. They stated specifically that Anthem would have loot boxes, but the good kind that are only cosmetic and have no random payouts for any money that you put in. As long as that game is actually good, they will have fulfilled a promise and earned back some goodwill. EA is still in the doghouse, but their press conferences didn't make it any worse, at least in my opinion. Microsoft has been in a rough position as of late. After being relegated to a distant second place behind Sony at the start of this new console generation, the success of the Nintendo Switch has pretty much pushed them into third in the minds of the gaming community. Xbox, however, has been steadily providing awesome hardware upgrades and services like backwards compatibility, party chat updates, and Game Pass, but all that effort pales in comparison to Sony and Nintendo's exclusive games. Microsoft, just like last year, needs to prove that it has high-quality exclusive IP to compete. Their conference was completely geared towards getting that message across, but not just by showing their upcoming exclusives like Halo Infinite, Gears 5, or Crackdown 3, but by announcing the starting of several new first-party studios and the acquisition of a couple high-quality third-party developers, namely Ninja Theory, who were behind the DMC reboot, and Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, two of my favorite games from the last 5 years. While they still have a ways to go until the exclusives gap is filled, they succeeded in promising that they intend to do just that. Bethesda is a legendary games publisher with some of the most well-reviewed and well-loved franchises under its stable. As one of the newest presenters during E3, the last couple of years they simply needed to prove that their own stage was justified rather than having their games show up in other conferences. I think they've since achieved that goal, so more specifically this year, they only need to give players more of what they have been doing or excite with brand new IP. While they did show a new logo for a new franchise, Starfield, no other information was really given other than it being sci-fi. So what we got was a doubling down on games that they've already released, with upcoming DLC announcements for Prey and Elder Scrolls Online, as well as more sequel franchises like Doom Eternal, Rage 2, and Wolfenstein Youngblood. Fallout 76 is looking to do something a little different in that familiar world, but that could end up dividing longtime fans. The tease of Elder Scrolls 6 with no gameplay for me just fell flat, so they might have been better off not making any mention of it. So while Bethesda certainly has the library to be on their own stage, this is sort of an off year where the strongest games aren't coming anytime soon and there's nothing to show. What was showed was more on the underwhelming side, but there's definitely been worse jobs done. For example, Square Enix, whose arguably biggest game Kingdom Hearts 3 was already shown in another press conference, showed it again. It's clear they want fans to believe that the January 29th release date they announced is actually happening, but besides a Platinum Games title called Babylon Fall and a game called The Quiet Man, there was just nothing new. And those two trailers showed no substantial gameplay. Sequels in the Tomb Raider and Just Cause franchise looked like they could have been footnotes in another conference. What Square Enix needed was for fans to believe their most long-awaited games like the Final Fantasy remake was making headway, but it didn't show up at all, so overall it was just a disappointment. Of all the third-party publishers, I personally think Ubisoft has been the most successful. They have a massive selection of highly rated titles, huge fan communities for each of those titles, and regularly surprise with new IP almost every other E3. When they do make mistakes, and they certainly have, they're pretty quick to fix them. Their conference should have been more of a celebration of their successes while showing what's coming next with impressive gameplay demos. Ubisoft did exactly that. Almost every game they showed off looked fun, even the ones I'm likely to never play. But even the games that were missteps came back to their stage with a vengeance, like Starlink, which is entering the long-dead Toys to Life arena, but injected real excitement by having Nintendo's beloved Star Fox character make a cameo. Sequels for The Division and Assassin's Creed showed off well, but Beyond Good and Evil 2 had only the slightest amount of pre-alpha gameplay to show off. Its new cinematic was very cool, but I think this is the last time this game can show up without extended gameplay before they start to push into Square Enix levels of apathy. At least for me, but overall, Ubisoft hit their mark. Sony has been the console frontrunner since this generation started, and in the last few years has seemed especially dominant with headline-grabbing exclusives and 10 out of 10 reviews being showered upon its first-party offerings. They've certainly earned their position at the top, but that's when it's easiest to lose. Sony already has an enviable games library and beloved hardware. All they needed to do was keep that momentum going by showing off what's coming next, and I personally think some cool additional services for the platform would have gone a long way for them, like the ability to change your PSN name or lightening up on the lack of crossplay between other systems. Sony instead focused on the same games that got them where they were. Their conference touted deep dives on only 4 exclusive games with other third-party titles sprinkled in between. The only brand new exclusive IP being Ghost of Tsushima, which is a beautiful new setting, but honestly nothing that hasn't been seen before gameplay-wise, at least at first glance. The Last of Us 2 had a very strong showing, but I'd argue we didn't need to see any more of Spider-Man, which closed out their show and is coming very soon. And Death Stranding, which gets more confusing with every bit of information coming out for it. While novel at first, this latest extended trailer with bits of gameplay showed off next to nothing about what the game actually is and how it will play. Weird and trippy story aside, I still don't know what you do in this game other than move your character through the environment. And after all this time, I'm over it. Hideo Kojima is a visionary and a legend. I did an entire video on his career up to this point, and that's why I don't think we need to keep seeing this game anymore. I trust the man, so at this point, just get it finished however long that's going to take. Nintendo is still riding on the success of the Switch launch, and they've yet to peak, so this E3 they just need to stay on course by continuing to announce new iterations in their stellar first-party catalog, which they did with Fire Emblem 3 Houses and Super Mario Party, as well as show off new third-party games. But along with these titles, Nintendo only dedicated a small portion of their presentation to games like Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Daemon X Machina, which I'm really curious about. Lots of high-profile ports like Dragon Ball FighterZ, Fortnite, and Wolfenstein the New Colossus can satisfy more than just the most hardcore Nintendo fans. But then the entire back half of their conference was dedicated to just Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Smash Bros. It was what I was waiting on to be announced before I knew for sure I would pick up a Switch. And while I ate up every second of the info they dropped on it, for an E3 presentation, I think a lot of the other games could have had longer looks. It just dominated the entire thing to the point that it made it seem like Nintendo didn't actually have that much to show off, which they actually did. So regardless, it was still a very strong showing from them. Overall, I think this year's E3 was one of the better years. Especially with no new hardware announcements, publishers are still hard at work on putting more high-quality games on every system. So whichever console you own, I think you have a whole lot to look forward to. So, what were you most excited about seeing at E3? Which press conference did you think was worse, and which did you think was best? Let us know. We're listening.